Introduction. Friends, if you want to watch the heartwarming and unforgettable movie Radio Flyer from 1992 in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Radio Flyer. We will dive into what this movie is all about, where you can watch it, and all the interesting facts that make this film so special. In today's video, I am going to give you all the details about which OTT platform or which satellite channel you can find this movie on. We will also go in depth into the technical aspects, the music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, the budget, and even the box office collection of this film. We will explore the story of the movie, and I'll also share a brief review of its plot. On top of that, we'll discuss the fascinating facts about this film, its storyline, the star cast, the performances of the actors, and which character plays which role. That's why I kindly request you, friends, to watch this video till the end. So, let's start the video. Alright friends, let's dive straight into the world of Radio Flyer, a film that doesn't just tell a story, it pulls you into a childhood full of wonder, pain, imagination, and the bittersweet taste of escape. The movie opens with an adult Mike, played by Tom Hanks, narrating a memory from his childhood. Right away, we know we're stepping into a story seen through the eyes of a child, but remembered by the grown-up version of that child. So yes, we're playing with perspective here. This isn't just a straight, linear tale. It's a memory, full of emotion, exaggeration, maybe even some fantasy. And that sets the tone. Is everything we see literal? Or is it the way kids need to see things to survive hard times? The plot kicks off when young Mike and his little brother Bobby, along with their mom, move to a new town after their mom remarries. And let's just say, this new stepfather, nicknamed the King, is no fairy tale prince. He's abusive, violent, and quickly becomes the dark cloud looming over the boy's childhood. This is where the emotional core of the story starts to build. Two young brothers, bound tightly together, trying to hold on to their innocence and hope while facing the harshest parts of life way too soon. But here's where Radio Flyer gets really interesting. It leans heavily into magical realism. The boys get a Radio Flyer wagon, you know, the classic little red wagon, but in their hands, it becomes so much more. It's not just a toy. It's a symbol of freedom, of escape, of possibility. They start believing they can turn this wagon into a flying machine that will help Bobby escape the abuse. Is it logical? No. Does the movie care? Not one bit. This is a story told through the logic of childhood, where imagination is a survival tool. Key turning points keep pushing the emotional stakes higher. One moment, the boys are laughing and scheming. The next, they're facing another terrifying outburst from the stepfather. Each scene pulls you tighter into the boys' desperate, magical plan. And while the adult Mike's voice occasionally reminds us this is all a memory, it's the child's perspective that drives the story, raw, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes heartbreakingly hopeful. The big conflict, of course, is whether the boys can actually escape. Will this flying wagon work? Can Bobby really break free? And here's where the movie walks a fine line between fantasy and harsh reality. It doesn't shy away from the emotional weight of child abuse, but it also doesn't crush the viewer with hopelessness. Instead, it creates a space where a child's belief in the impossible becomes the most powerful tool they have. Emotionally, Radio Flyer is a roller coaster. One moment you're swept up in the brothers' adventurous spirit, the next you're hit with the brutal reminder of what they're trying to escape. It's this push and pull between joy and sorrow, imagination and reality, that gives the narrative its impact. And the ending, well, it's the kind of ending that leaves you wondering, did Bobby really fly away, or is that just how Mike chooses to remember it? It's a beautifully bittersweet ambiguity that stays with you long after the credits roll. So, in short, Radio Flyer doesn't just follow a straight path from A to B. It swerves through memories, dips into fantasy, and soars on the wings of two boys' desperate hope. It's not just a movie about what happened. It's a movie about how it's remembered, and that's what makes the story so engaging, so layered, and so unforgettable. Alright friends, let's talk about the characters in Radio Flyer, because trust me, they're not just names on a script, they are the beating heart of this movie. At the center, we have young Mike and Bobby, Two brothers whose bond feels so real, so genuine, that you almost forget you're watching actors on a screen. Mike is the older brother, the protector, the storyteller. He's the one who guides us through this world, both as the child living it and the adult remembering it. What's so fascinating is how Mike's character shows both strength and vulnerability. He wants to be the hero, but he's still a child himself. He's scared, confused, and unsure how to fix the nightmare they're living in. His journey isn't about becoming fearless. It's about holding on to hope even when fear is everywhere. Then there's Bobby, the younger brother, who at first seems like the typical little kid tagging along. But Bobby is much more than that. He's brave in a quiet, heartbreaking way. He's the one who suffers most directly under the stepfather's violence, yet he never loses his belief in the magical escape plan. Bobby's character isn't just there to be rescued. He fuels the story's emotional drive. His unwavering faith in the impossible, that they can make a wagon fly, gives the movie its pulse. And as the story moves forward, you can feel Bobby growing stronger, not in the physical sense, but in spirit. He becomes the symbol of survival, of a child's uncrushable hope. Now let's talk about their mom. She's a layered character too, even though she's not the focus. She's loving and hardworking, clearly trying her best. But she's also trapped, unable or unwilling to see the full horror unfolding under her roof. Her relationship with the boys adds complexity. She's their safety net in some ways, but also a blind spot. And that tension shapes the boys' determination to take matters into their own hands. It's like they realize, maybe before they should, that the adults around them aren't going to save them. And then we have the king, the stepfather. He's not given a real name, and that's intentional. To the boys, he's larger than life in the worst way. A looming, violent figure whose moods rule the house. He's not shown as a deep or sympathetic villain, but that works because we're seeing him through the eyes of scared kids. To them, he's a monster, plain and simple. His presence shapes everything the boys do, from their secret plans to their moments of whispered courage. What makes the character development in Radio Flyer so powerful is that it's all wrapped up in the relationships. Mike and Bobby aren't just individual characters, they're a team, a unit. Their bond drives the plot forward, and you see how their love for each other transforms them. Mike grows into a leader, not because he wants to, but because Bobby needs him to. Bobby grows into a symbol of hope, not because he's naive, but because he refuses to let the darkness win. And the stepfather, as the force they're up against, pushes them both toward their breaking points, and, ultimately, their transformation. Even the adult Mike, narrating the story, is part of the character arc. He's not just telling a childhood tale, he's processing his own growth, looking back and realizing how those moments shaped the man he became. So, in the end, the characters in Radio Flyer don't just exist to fill out the plot, they are the story. Their growth, their struggles, their fierce love for each other. That's what gives the movie its emotional weight and makes it such an unforgettable experience. All right, friends, let's get into the performances that make Radio Flyer such an emotional ride. Because let me tell you, the actors here don't just show up, they pour their hearts into these roles and pull you right into the world of the film. First, we have Elijah Wood as young Mike, and oh boy, does he carry a lot on his small shoulders. Elijah was just a kid when he filmed this, but you can already see the spark of talent that would later make him a huge star. He doesn't just act like a scared older brother. He becomes that kid with all the love, fear, and determination bundled up in one. His eyes tell the whole story, flickering between moments of wonder and moments of quiet heartbreak. Watching Elijah as Mike, you don't just see a performance, you feel the weight he's carrying. Then there's Joseph Mazzello as Bobby, the younger brother, and let me just say, this kid is a powerhouse. Bobby is the emotional core of the story, and Joseph plays him with this perfect mix of innocence and bravery. He's not loud or over the top. He's soft, gentle, and that's what makes his performance hit so hard. When Bobby believes the wagon can fly, you believe it too, because Joseph sells that childlike hope without a trace of irony. There are moments where his face just crumples under the pressure of his home life, and you can't help but want to reach through the screen and hug him. It's that natural, that affecting. Tom Hanks, as the adult Mike who narrates the story, is another key ingredient. He's not on screen a lot, but his voice shapes the entire film. Hanks brings this warmth, this bittersweet nostalgia that wraps around the childhood scenes like a soft blanket. He's not just reading lines, he's remembering, and you feel every ounce of love, regret, and longing in his voice. It elevates the entire story, giving it layers beyond just what we see. Now, let's talk about Adam Baldwin as the king, the stepfather. Baldwin plays him with such controlled menace that you never know when the next storm will hit. He's not a cartoon villain. He's terrifying in a way that feels disturbingly real. Baldwin's performance is all about tension. You can sense his presence even when he's not in the frame, and that's a sign of how deeply he nails this role. He doesn't need big, loud moments to scare you. It's the unpredictability, the simmering anger under the surface that makes him unforgettable. Lorraine Bracco, playing the boy's mom, also deserves attention. She brings a warmth and vulnerability to the role, showing a woman who's doing her best but is caught in her own struggles. She's not a perfect mother, but Bracco gives her depth and heart. She adds to the emotional realism of the film, making you understand why the boys love her, but also why they know they can't fully rely on her to fix everything. Even the smaller supporting characters, like the neighborhood kids and quirky locals, add color and texture to the world. They make the town feel alive and layered, not just a backdrop. Every actor, no matter how small the role, seems dialed into the emotional wavelength of the story, and that makes the whole film feel richer. In the end, it's the combination of these performances, the raw honesty of the child actors, the grounding presence of Tom Hanks, the quiet menace of Adam Baldwin, and the layered warmth of Lorraine Bracco, that creates a world you believe in, a story you feel deep in your chest. Without these performances, Radio Flyer wouldn't carry nearly the same emotional punch. But with them, it soars. All right, friends, now let's pull back the curtain and talk about the director's hand in shaping Radio Flyer. Because wow, this movie doesn't just tell a story, it feels like a memory, like you're swimming inside a child's imagination, and that's no accident. Richard Donner, the director, is the mastermind here, and he carefully steers every element to create a tone that balances wonder and heartbreak without tipping too far into either. Donner is known for making big films like Superman and The Goonies, so he understands adventure, but here he takes that sense of childhood adventure and blends it with something darker, something deeply emotional. From the very first scenes, you feel the mood he's crafting. It's nostalgic but not sugary. It's whimsical but not silly. It's heavy but never hopeless. One of the most striking things Donner does is play with perspective. Remember, this story is told through adult Mike's memory, so we're never sure if what we're seeing is the hard truth or the way a child needed to remember it. Donner leans into that ambiguity with a touch of magical realism, where the ordinary feels extraordinary. A simple red wagon isn't just a wagon. Under Donner's direction, it becomes a potential flying machine, a symbol of escape, freedom, and belief. He lets the camera linger just long enough on these little details, the wheels, the wings, the boys' wide-eyed faces, so we, the audience, slip into that same childlike mindset. Pacing-wise, Donner walks a tricky line. He doesn't rush the adventure, nor does he let the darker moments overtake the film's spirit. The scenes move with a kind of gentle, steady rhythm, where you're allowed to soak in the quiet moments between the boys, the tense silences when the king is around, and the bursts of joy when the boys are dreaming up their next plan. He gives space for the emotional beats to land, which makes the highs feel higher and the lows hit even harder. Visually, Donner makes some bold choices that stand out. The cinematography often frames the boys against vast, open landscapes, fields, skies, empty roads, making them look small, isolated, yet somehow determined. There's a subtle contrast between the warm, sunlit outdoor scenes, where the boys' imaginations come alive, and the darker, more claustrophobic indoor shots, where the stepfather's presence feels inescapable. It's a visual storytelling move that reinforces the themes without shouting them in your face. And let's not forget the way Donner uses light and color. The world through a child's eyes is often brighter, more vibrant, even when life is hard, and Donner taps into that, making the fantasy elements pop just enough to blur the line between real and imagined. Another brilliant directorial touch is how Donner handles tension. He doesn't need jump scares or loud shocks. Instead, he builds unease slowly, through small glances, quiet pauses, the way a character stiffens when they hear the stepfather's truck pull up. That restraint makes the emotional tension feel grounded, not overblown. Finally, Donner's narrative vision holds everything together. He never loses sight of the fact that this is ultimately a memory, one shaped by love, pain, and the fierce need to believe in something better. His direction ensures that the audience is always walking that tightrope between reality and imagination, just like the characters are. By the end, you're left with this beautifully crafted, bittersweet experience that lingers long after the credits roll, and that's Donner's magic at work. All right, friends, now let's zoom in on the cinematography of Radio Flyer, because trust me, the way this movie looks is just as important as the way it feels. The cinematographer, Laszlo Kovacs, knows exactly how to use the camera not just to show us the story, but to pull us inside the boy's world. Let's start with the camera angles. Notice how often the shots are framed from a low angle, looking up. This isn't random. It's a subtle trick that makes the boy's world feel big, intimidating, and sometimes even magical. When you're a kid, everything feels larger than life, and Kovacs uses the camera to mimic that sense of scale. You're not just watching two small boys. You're seeing the world through their eyes, where a backyard can become a launch pad and a red wagon can become an aircraft. Lighting plays a huge role too. When the boys are outside, the lighting is often warm, golden, almost dreamy, like the sun is wrapping the scenes in a blanket of possibility. But when the story shifts inside the house, especially when the king is around, the lighting changes sharply. It gets darker, colder, with harsh shadows creeping across the walls. These shifts aren't just for style. They shape the atmosphere, turning the home into a place of tension and danger, while the outside world becomes a space of freedom and escape. Framing is another brilliant element here. Kovacs uses wide, open shots to emphasize the boys' isolation. Think of them standing alone in a vast field, the sky stretching endlessly above them. It makes their struggle feel even more poignant, like they're just two tiny figures trying to push back against a massive, uncaring world. But in the intimate, emotional moments, the camera pulls in close, framing the boys tightly so we can see every flicker of hope, fear, and determination on their faces. Those close-ups are like emotional punches, making sure we feel what they're feeling. And let's talk about the visually striking moments, because, oh yes, there are some unforgettable ones. The flying wagon scenes, for example, are pure visual magic. Whether you believe they're literally happening or just part of Mike's memory, the way they are shot, the camera soaring with the wagon, the wind rushing past, the boys' faces lit up with joy, makes your heart lift right along with them. Another standout is the way Kovacs uses reflections and windows, giving us layered shots that hint at the dual worlds the boys live in. The grim reality inside the house, and the hopeful dreams just outside the window. The cinematography also creates tension in small, quiet ways. A shot lingering too long on a closed door. A slow, creeping zoom when the stepfather's truck pulls into the driveway. A shadow moving across a wall before we even hear the character's voice. These moments build suspense without loud music or fast cuts. It's all in the way the camera watches, waits, and breathes. Overall, the cinematography in Radio Flyer isn't just about making pretty pictures. It's about capturing the soul of the story. Every angle, every light choice, every carefully composed frame helps us step into the shoes of these two boys, feel their hopes, their fears, and their dreams. It's not just what we see, it's how we experience it. And that's what makes the visual storytelling here so unforgettable. All right, friends, let's crack open the editing and pacing of Radio Flyer, because this is where the movie's emotional rhythm really takes shape. Editing, you see, isn't just about cutting scenes together. It's about creating a flow, a heartbeat that carries you from one moment to the next without ever breaking the emotional thread. And in this film, editor Stuart Papp does something really special. He builds a rhythm that mirrors the emotional ups and downs of childhood itself. Think about how memories work. They don't move in a straight, clean line. They swirl, they jump, they linger on certain moments, they skip past others. That's exactly how the editing feels here. When the boys are caught up in their plans, when they're dreaming up the impossible, the pace picks up, the cuts come quicker, the scenes roll into each other with excitement and urgency. You can feel the rush, like you're tumbling right along with them into their next wild idea. It's playful, almost breathless, capturing that whirlwind energy of two kids plotting an escape. But then, when the story turns darker, when the threat of the king looms over the house, the editing slows down. Scenes stretch out, pauses get longer, and the silence becomes heavy. The cuts get more deliberate, more careful, forcing you to sit in the tension and dread. You're not racing ahead anymore. You're holding your breath, waiting for the next blow to fall. This shift in pacing isn't random. It's perfectly tuned to the emotional stakes of each scene. One of the coolest things is how the editing handles transitions between reality and fantasy. There are moments when you're not entirely sure if you've crossed into one of Mike's imaginative daydreams, and that's by design. The cuts glide smoothly from grounded, everyday life into sequences that shimmer with magical possibility. It's not jarring or clunky, it's seamless, like slipping into a dream without even realizing it. That blending is what gives the movie its unique emotional punch, because it lets you live inside the boys' hopeful minds, even as their real-world struggles continue. Now, does the pacing ever drag? You could argue there are moments when the movie lingers a bit too long in its quieter, reflective scenes, but honestly, that's part of its charm. Those slower beats give you space to feel the weight of what the boys are going through. If it rushed through the heavy parts just to get back to the adventure, it would lose some of its emotional depth. On the flip side, the film never speeds so fast that you lose track of the emotional stakes. Even in the most imaginative, fast-moving sequences, the editing makes sure you stay grounded in what matters, the boys' bond, their hope, their pain. And let's not forget the power of the film's rhythm in shaping its emotional impact. By carefully balancing fast and slow, light and dark, the editing creates a kind of emotional seesaw, lifting you up with moments of wonder, then dropping you into moments of tension and sorrow. That constant shift keeps you engaged, keeps you feeling, and by the time you reach the final scenes, you realize you've been on a complete emotional journey without even noticing how perfectly the cuts and pacing guided you there. So when you watch Radio Flyer, pay attention to the way it moves, not just what it shows you, but how it carries you along. That's the editor's invisible magic, and in this film, it's working overtime to make sure the story lands right in your heart. All right, friends, let's dive into the soundtrack and score of Radio Flyer, because wow, the music here isn't just background noise. It's like the invisible hand guiding your heart through every twist and turn of the story. Composer Hans Zimmer. Yes, that Hans Zimmer worked his magic on this film long before he became the blockbuster giant we all know today. But even back in the early 90s, you can hear the beginnings of his talent for crafting music that doesn't just accompany a scene, it elevates it. Zimmer's score in Radio Flyer is delicate, nostalgic, and deeply emotional. It wraps around the film like a soft blanket, adding warmth to the hopeful moments and a haunting undercurrent to the darker ones. One of the most striking things is how Zimmer uses recurring motifs, little musical themes that pop up again and again, tied to the boys' dreams, their fears, and their unbreakable bond. When you hear those gentle piano or string phrases return, it's like the film is whispering, remember what's at stake. Remember what they're holding on to. It builds this emotional thread that pulls you deeper without shouting over the story. But here's the really fun part. The music knows when to step back. Zimmer doesn't blast you with sweeping orchestration when a quiet moment will do. In fact, some of the most powerful scenes lean into expertly used silence or minimal sound, just a faint, lingering note or a subtle shift in tone, letting the actors and the emotions on screen take the lead. That restraint makes the music's return even more impactful, like a sudden wave of feeling washing over you when you least expect it. There are also standout compositions that just stick in your mind. The music that plays during the boys' moments of imagination, when they're working on their flying wagon, when they're caught up in the thrill of escape, has this light, almost magical quality, blending wonder and innocence. It's not loud or showy. It's gentle, playful, and perfectly tuned to the boys' perspective. And when the tension rises, Zimmer shifts gears, layering in darker tones, slower tempos, and deeper sounds that signal the creeping danger of their home life. The transition between these musical moods is seamless, and that balance keeps the emotional flow of the film smooth and engaging. Another brilliant element is how the score interacts with the sounds of the world around the characters. You'll notice moments where the music seems to echo the creak of a door, the hum of a truck engine, the rush of wind. It creates this blending of score and sound design that makes the entire atmosphere feel alive, like the music isn't just playing over the film, but is part of its fabric. It pulls you into the world more fully, making you feel every beat, every breath, every moment. So, next time you watch Radio Flyer, listen closely to the way the music shapes your experience. Notice how it lifts you during the boys' high points, holds you steady during their lowest moments, and sometimes just steps aside to let the story breathe. Zimmer's score is like the movie's emotional compass, pointing you exactly where your heart needs to go, without ever overpowering the delicate, bittersweet journey of these two brothers. That's the magic of a great soundtrack. You don't just hear it, you feel it. All right, friends, buckle up because now we're diving into the heart of Radio Flyer, its themes and messages, and let me tell you, this movie is packed with so much more than just a childhood adventure. On the surface, you've got two boys building a flying wagon to escape a bad home situation. But underneath that, there's a rich, layered exploration of hope, resilience, imagination, trauma, and the fierce, almost desperate power of belief. At its core, Radio Flyer is about the lengths children will go to when they're trapped in circumstances they can't control. The film dives deep into the theme of escapism, the idea that when reality becomes too harsh, imagination becomes a lifeline. Mike and Bobby aren't just building a flying machine for fun. They're building it because it's their only way to believe in something better. That theme hits hard because the movie doesn't sugarcoat the pain they're trying to escape from, the abuse, the fear, the feeling of being powerless, and it shows how imagination becomes both a survival tool and a kind of rebellion against hopelessness. Another major theme running through the film is the bond of brotherhood. Mike and Bobby's relationship is the emotional engine of the story, and it's all about love, loyalty, and sacrifice. Mike's role as the narrator, looking back on his childhood, adds a layer of reflection. He's grappling with the guilt and pain of not being able to save his brother the way he wanted. This idea of carrying past wounds, of holding onto both love and regret, gives the film a bittersweet edge that lingers long after the credits roll. The movie also wrestles with the theme of belief, and not just belief in fantasy or magic, but belief in the possibility of escape, of change, of survival. The adults in the movie often dismiss the boys' dreams as childish nonsense, but for Mike and Bobby, believing in the flying wagon is the only thing keeping them going. The film never outright tells you whether the wagon actually flew, or if it was just a metaphor. And that's the point. It's about the need to believe, not whether the belief is technically real. That idea sticks with you because it forces you to ask, when is belief more powerful than fact? There's also a quieter, more haunting theme woven into the story, the failure of adults to protect children. The film doesn't paint a pretty picture here. The mom is loving but overwhelmed, the stepfather is violent, and the other adults in the boys' lives either don't see the danger or don't know how to intervene. This theme adds a raw, uncomfortable layer, making you think about the cracks in the systems meant to protect the vulnerable. It's not hammered in with big speeches or dramatic moments. It's just there, simmering beneath the surface, making you reflect on how many kids in the real world are forced to rely on their own wits and dreams to survive. What makes these themes land so powerfully is that they don't feel forced or preachy. The movie lets you feel them rather than spelling them out. The emotional weight comes from watching these characters fight for a sliver of light in a dark world. And that fight, that stubborn hope, is what leaves the biggest impression. You walk away not just thinking about a flying wagon, but about the resilience of children, the power of dreams, and the ache of memory. It's one of those stories that slips under your skin and stays there, nudging you to think, wonder, and maybe even believe a little more yourself. All right, let's get into the visual effects and CGI of Radio Flyer. And let me tell you, it's a fascinating mix of practical magic and subtle digital wizardry. Now, this was 1992, so the digital effects we think of today weren't quite at the same level. But what the filmmakers did with what they had is pretty impressive. The visual effects in this film aren't in your face. They don't scream for attention. Instead, they quietly enhance the story, almost as if they're trying to sneak under your skin and make you feel the wonder without shoving it in your face. First off, let's talk about the flying wagon, the star of the show. The whole idea of a red wagon soaring through the skies isn't something you see every day, but the effects here work in harmony with the film's tone. The use of practical effects, like using real wagons and filming them with wires, gives the sequence a sense of grounded realism that blends beautifully with the more fantastical elements. There's something endearing about watching the boys' dreams take shape with such tangible, physical effects. The movement of the wagon as it flies doesn't feel digital and weightless. It feels real. It's like you're watching these kids' imaginations come to life, and it's grounded enough that you can almost believe it could happen. The practical effects here hold their own, giving a sense of authenticity to the magic they're creating. Then there are the digital effects, which are used sparingly but effectively. For the more surreal moments, when the wagon starts to take flight or when certain dreamlike sequences unfold, the CGI takes over. And here's the thing, it doesn't overdo it. The visual effects are designed to enhance, not distract. They don't scream for your attention or pull you out of the moment. They flow in and out of the narrative naturally, helping to build that dreamy, almost otherworldly atmosphere without completely breaking the film's grounded tone. The balance is delicate. You're not completely transported into a CGI fantasy land. Instead, the digital effects complement the sense of wonder already in the story. What's especially cool is how the film integrates the real and the imagined, using visual effects to show the transition between those worlds. When the kids are caught up in their fantasies, the visual effects enhance the sense of escapism. But when the film returns to the harshness of their reality, the effects fade into the background, letting the raw emotional weight of the scenes stand on their own. It's a visual dance that never lets the effects steal the spotlight. They're always there to serve the story, not overshadow it. In comparison, the practical effects, like the way the boys interact with their environment, the physical challenges they face, and the actual flying scenes, feel more alive in a way that CGI can't quite match. There's a tangible sense of effort, of sweat, and of genuine human interaction in those scenes. The practical effects keep the story grounded, while the digital effects gently nudge you into the world of imagination without breaking the spell. The blend of the two isn't seamless in the sense that you'd forget about it, but it works in perfect harmony with the tone the film is setting. In the end, Radio Flyer doesn't use visual effects to dazzle you. It uses them to help you believe. The effects aren't there just to show you something cool. They're there to immerse you in the fantasy these boys are creating, a fantasy of escape, of hope, and of something better. They're subtle, they're purposeful, and most importantly, they serve the story, which is something you can't always say about films with more in-your-face visual effects. All right, let's talk about the world building in Radio Flyer, because, oh boy, the set design and locations aren't just backdrops, they are the story in many ways. This isn't some glossy, perfect Hollywood setting. No, the world of Radio Flyer feels lived in, worn, and real. Every location, every prop, every piece of the set feels like it's been thoughtfully chosen to tell you something about the characters, their struggles, and their dreams. First off, the house. The house where Mike and Bobby live isn't some idyllic home. It's old, creaky, and oppressive. The walls close in around the boys, and the space feels like it's trapping them. The rooms are dimly lit, and you can sense the heavy atmosphere as soon as you step inside. This is a place where dreams aren't made. It's a place where survival is the daily goal. The set design in the house highlights that reality. The broken furniture, the worn-down kitchen, the cold hallways, they're not just there for decoration. They help communicate the emotional weight the boys are carrying. Every corner of the house feels like it's pressing in on them, making their longing for escape more desperate. The rooms are filled with shadows, and the windows are often shut tight, making the outside world feel unreachable. Then there's the contrast of the outdoors. When the boys are outside, especially in their little haven, things start to open up. The wide spaces, the open sky, the grassy fields, all of a sudden they're free. The props, like the red wagon, serve as symbols of that freedom and hope. That simple red wagon with its wheels and handles isn't just a toy. It's a vehicle of possibility, a physical representation of their dreams. You can almost feel the weight of the world lifting off their shoulders as they roll the wagon out into the open air. The stark difference between the constricting indoors and the wide open outdoors enhances the boys' need to escape and makes their imaginative journey feel all the more significant. And let's talk about the props, because they are absolutely crucial. The wagon itself is a centerpiece, sure, but think about the smaller items that surround the boys. The hand-drawn maps, the little tools they use to make their flying machine, the scattered bits and pieces of their make-believe world, they aren't just props. They represent the boys' ingenuity, their creativity, and their refusal to accept the limits of their world. These simple objects are elevated through the way the camera lingers on them, giving them more weight than they might have in another movie. The locations also play a huge role in enhancing the emotional depth of the story. There's the playground, a place of freedom and escape for the boys, where they can imagine a better life. But it's not all fun and games. It's also a spot where they face their fears, where the boundaries between fantasy and reality blur. The shift from one location to another isn't just a change in scenery, it's a change in mood, in energy. You go from tight, oppressive indoor spaces to wide, expansive outdoor shots that symbolize the boys' hopes and dreams. And then, as the story moves forward, the film shifts again, taking you back to that dark, confined space, creating a visual tension that mirrors the emotional arc of the characters. The locations also tell you about the world the boys inhabit. The industrial, worn-down areas of the town reflect the harshness of their environment, where the possibility of escape feels far-fetched. The set design helps show how limited their options are, how few places they can go to escape their reality. But it also highlights their resilience. In this bleak, limited world, they find ways to dream, to create, and to survive. The locations are not just backdrops, they are part of the emotional journey, serving as a visual reminder of both the confines of their world and the freedom they yearn for. What's really impressive is how the locations, props, and set design aren't just serving the visual aspect of the story. They're working hand in hand with the emotional undercurrents, supporting the film's themes of escape, resilience, and the power of imagination. Every detail, from the cracked window panes to the wide open fields, contributes to the larger narrative, making the world of Radio Flyer feel rich, textured, and deeply connected to the story's heart. Let's take a moment to talk about the dialogue in Radio Flyer, because if there's one thing this film does perfectly, it's capturing the raw, unfiltered voices of its characters. The script is anything but cookie cutter, and the dialogue feels as real as the world these boys are living in. It doesn't pull any punches when it comes to the tough stuff, but it also doesn't shy away from the moments of lightness and hope. What's brilliant is how the script balances the weight of the situation with moments of humor, imagination, and childhood wonder. It's the kind of dialogue that stays with you, not because it's filled with quotable lines, but because it feels so true to the characters and their experiences. One of the standout elements of the script is the way it captures the bond between Mike and Bobby. The lines they share, especially when they're talking about their dreams and their plans for escape, have a certain innocence to them. But they're also laced with an underlying urgency. These are kids who know their world is harsh, but they don't let it crush their spirits completely. The dialogue between them is full of playful optimism, but also hints at the darker realities they're dealing with. It's this delicate balance that makes their relationship feel so authentic. There's a line Mike says early on that resonates. "We weren't just building a flying machine, we were building a way out." That line sums up the whole essence of their relationship and their journey. It's not just about the adventure, it's about survival, escape, and the sheer determination to hold on to hope. Then there's the way the script handles the adult characters. The stepfather's dialogue is laced with a sort of cruel, cold authority that sets him apart from the boys. Every time he speaks, there's a chilling weight to his words that cuts through the warmth of the boys' dreams. And the mother, while loving, is overwhelmed and often unable to protect her children in the ways they need. The contrast in their dialogue and the way they speak to the boys helps reinforce the power dynamics in the household and highlights the emotional struggle of the children. But what really makes the script shine are the quieter moments when the dialogue isn't so much about action, but about feeling. The film isn't filled with big speeches or dramatic outbursts. Instead, it captures those subtle, almost throwaway lines that say more than a monologue ever could. For example, when Mike reflects on their situation, his words have a weight that transcends what's actually being said. The dialogue isn't flashy, but it's poignant, capturing the pain and hope of childhood in ways that are both heartbreaking and beautiful. The script also nails the moments of fantasy. The boys' creative conversations about the flying wagon, the way they describe their imagined world, or even how they talk about their dreams of escape. These conversations are where the film's imagination really takes off, and the dialogue here feels alive with possibility. The boys don't just talk about building a wagon, they talk about freedom. They speak of the future with such vividness that it almost feels tangible. Their words paint pictures of what they hope for, and in doing so, the script becomes a kind of manifestation of their dreams. But perhaps the most impactful lines in the script come at the very end, when Mike reflects on what they went through. There's a bittersweet tone in his voice as he speaks about the past, and you realize that this film isn't just about the escape from their physical world, but from their emotional scars as well. The dialogue in these moments isn't overdramatic. It's simple, but it hits hard. You realize that the boys didn't just survive, they grew, and the dialogue carries that weight with a quiet power. The beauty of the script in Radio Flyer lies in its ability to convey so much with so little. The dialogue doesn't rely on flashy words or complex metaphors. It's about the simplicity of the moment, the rawness of the emotions, and the purity of childhood dreams and struggles. The standout lines aren't necessarily the ones that are shouted or even remembered, but the ones that linger, that get under your skin and make you think about how far kids will go to create a world where they feel safe, loved, and free. The script isn't just telling a story. It's whispering the truths that we sometimes forget about the power of imagination and the resilience of the human spirit. Let's dive into the genre execution of Radio Flyer. And folks, this one is a bit of a wild card. At first glance, you might expect this to be just another kid's adventure story, full of whimsy and lighthearted fun. But what this movie does, and does so well, is take the genre conventions of family films and completely flip them on their head. Sure, there are moments of adventure, imagination, and childhood wonder. But beneath that surface, there's a much darker, more complex undercurrent running through the entire film. Right off the bat, the movie sets up an adventure. The boys are building a flying wagon, after all, and who wouldn't expect a fun, whimsical journey with a lot of lighthearted action? But then, the movie throws you a curveball by introducing some heavy, emotionally charged material. This is not just a film about kids having fun in their backyard. No, Radio Flyer is a deep exploration of trauma, survival, and resilience. And while it still keeps the adventure vibe alive, it subverts the typical feel-good family movie structure by diving into darker, more serious themes. Where the film does shine, though, is in its ability to balance genres within this context. You've got moments that feel like pure adventure, the boys building their flying wagon, the excitement of their dreams taking shape, the thrill of flying, but those moments are tempered by the reality of their situation. There's a blend of humor, innocence, and childlike imagination mixed with the ever-present tension of their home life. The drama here is understated but powerful, and it elevates the emotional stakes of the story. When you think it's just going to be a fun ride, the film pulls you back into the harsh realities the boys face, reminding you that even in their dreams, they can't completely escape the struggles of their real lives. One of the ways the movie subverts genre conventions is by avoiding the typical bad guy trope. Sure, the stepfather is the antagonist, but he's not your usual villain. He's not over-the-top evil or a cartoonish figure of hate. Instead, he's a more complex, tragic figure, and the real antagonist is the situation itself, the lack of safety, love, and protection that the boys desperately need. The film doesn't lean on easy answers or neatly packaged resolutions. It shows that escape, whether through imagination or reality, isn't as simple as just defeating the bad guy. It's about surviving, finding hope, and holding onto your humanity in a world that sometimes doesn't make room for that. Then there's the humor. It's not slapstick or silly. It's rooted in the boys' resilience and their ability to find light in the darkest situations. There are moments when you can't help but smile at the boys' ingenuity or their sense of adventure, but those moments don't come at the expense of the deeper emotional weight of the film. The humor doesn't overshadow the drama. It enhances it, giving you brief moments of relief before plunging you back into the emotional roller coaster of the boys' lives. The suspense, too, is crafted differently than in a typical adventure film. It's not built around danger or external threats. Instead, the tension comes from the emotional stakes. Will the boys escape? Will they be able to keep their spirits up in the face of so much hardship? The suspense isn't about waiting for the next big action sequence. It's about wondering if the boys can hold onto their dreams in such a brutal world. There's a constant undercurrent of uncertainty that keeps you on the edge of your seat, but it's an emotional tension rather than a physical one. In terms of genre execution, Radio Flyer does something pretty unique. It takes the framework of a family adventure film, adds a heavy dose of drama, and blends in themes of trauma, hope, and escape. It doesn't rely on the usual cliches, the goofy villains, the feel-good moments, or the over-the-top action. Instead, it introduces a fresh, more nuanced perspective on what it means to be a kid in a difficult situation. The humor and adventure are there, but they don't take center stage. The film is constantly shifting between light and dark, between imagination and reality, and that's what makes it feel like more than just a simple family movie. In the end, Radio Flyer doesn't just follow genre conventions, it redefines them. It mixes adventure with emotional depth, humor with heartbreak, and fantasy with reality. It's the kind of film that surprises you, taking you places you didn't expect, and leaving you with a lingering sense of wonder, but also a deep reflection on the complexities of life. Radio Flyer isn't just a movie about two boys trying to escape their troubled home. It's a subtle, yet powerful commentary on the harsh realities of childhood, family dynamics, and the emotional scars that can be passed down through generations. It's almost as if the film is trying to hold up a mirror to society, forcing us to face uncomfortable truths about trauma, neglect, and resilience, while doing so in a way that doesn't feel preachy or forced. Instead, it's woven seamlessly into the narrative, almost like a whisper in the background, telling you things about the world that might be hard to hear, but are necessary to understand. At its core, the film is deeply aware of the socioeconomic backdrop that the boys are growing up in. It doesn't shout about poverty or class struggle, but it's there, in the worn-down house, the absence of support systems, and the constant feeling of being trapped. The setting, a small, struggling community, reflects the difficulties many children face in homes where resources are scarce and emotional well-being isn't a priority. The mother, while loving, is overwhelmed by life and powerless to protect her children from the harshness of their situation. This presents a subtle critique of the lack of social safety nets and the failure of the system to protect children in vulnerable environments. The film doesn't get bogged down in politics, but it still quietly asks, what happens when the adults in a child's life fail them? Then there's the subtle commentary on abuse. It's not a film that sets out to be a message movie, but the stepfather's treatment of the boys is undeniable, and the emotional toll it takes is palpable. The way his presence looms over the household, the way he uses fear and control to dominate the family, speaks to larger societal issues about power, control, and the cycle of abuse. It doesn't sensationalize the situation, but instead, it shows the emotional damage that's left behind, the trauma, the anger, the confusion, and it invites the audience to consider the long-term impact of these cycles on children and families. What happens when children are forced to cope with a world that isn't safe or nurturing? How do they survive? And what tools do they have to heal? But Radio Flyer also offers a kind of hopeful counterpoint to these darker themes, the power of imagination. The boys' creativity and the dream of flying away in their wagon act as both a literal and metaphorical escape from their grim reality. In many ways, The film makes a statement on the necessity of dreams, of having something to hold on to when everything around you seems broken. It doesn't shy away from showing how difficult life can be, but it also champions the idea that the mind can be a powerful tool for survival. The fantasy element, building a flying machine to escape their world, is a direct response to the limitations of their physical reality. In a world where everything seems stacked against them, their dreams are one of the few things that remain in their control. The film doesn't preach the importance of imagination, it simply shows it, allowing the audience to draw their own conclusions about how vital it is for children to have the freedom to dream. The film also makes a soft but important commentary about the importance of male bonding and brotherhood. The relationship between Mike and Bobby is at the heart of the film, and it subtly explores how young boys cope with pain and adversity. Their connection goes beyond just being siblings. It's a lifeline in a world that doesn't offer many others. It highlights the importance of supportive relationships in the face of adversity, especially for young boys, who are often expected to bottle up their emotions or act tough. The tenderness between them is both heartwarming and heartbreaking, reminding the audience that vulnerability, even in the toughest situations, is something to be nurtured. By not forcing these social and cultural messages, Radio Flyer achieves a rare balance. It doesn't hit you over the head with its themes, but rather it lets them seep in, like an undercurrent running through the film. The way it handles abuse and neglect is delicate, never sensationalizing the topic, but instead showing its emotional and psychological effects on the boys. The film doesn't offer easy answers or resolutions, which in itself is a commentary on the complexities of trauma. It doesn't try to fix the problems, but rather, it paints an honest picture of the way children navigate a world that doesn't always protect them. In many ways, the film's portrayal of these issues, childhood trauma, neglect, and the search for escape, feels more relevant today than ever. It's a reminder of how deeply these issues can affect children, even when they're not talked about openly. And yet, the film doesn't leave you in a place of despair. It leaves you with the understanding that even in the face of overwhelming challenges, there is always the possibility of flight, both literally and figuratively. If there's one thing Radio Flyer excels at, it's emotionally pulling the audience into its world. From the moment you see the boys with their innocent faces and grand dreams, you're already invested in their journey. And just when you think you've got the emotional tone figured out, the film throws a wrench in your expectations and takes you on a roller coaster of feelings that you weren't quite prepared for. It's that kind of movie that sneaks up on you, making you feel deeply, and sometimes it's hard to pinpoint exactly why. There are moments that make your heart swell. As you watch Mike and Bobby's bond deepen, their shared dreams of escaping their grim reality taking flight in the form of a wooden wagon. These are the moments that make you laugh and smile. Because let's face it, who wouldn't want to believe in the magic of a flying wagon? Especially when life feels like it's offering so little. But then, just as you get comfortable with the lighthearted moments, the film gently reminds you of the dark forces at play. The tension and underlying sorrow simmer beneath the surface, creating a sense of unease that builds as the movie progresses. You might find yourself laughing one moment, and the next, you're holding back tears. The film expertly flips between these emotional extremes, never letting you stay too long in any one place, and making sure you feel everything with them. Then there's the gut punch of the darker moments, the harsh reality of the stepfather's presence, the strain on the mother's ability to protect her children, and the rawness of the boy's emotional survival. These are the scenes that make you feel something deep in your chest, those moments that you won't forget. And yet, they're balanced by the pure moments of childhood wonder and fantasy, where the boys allow themselves to imagine a world where things are better, even if it's just for a brief escape. The moments where the kids fly, even if only in their imagination, give the audience a fleeting sense of hope and joy, even though we know it can't last forever. What's fascinating about Radio Flyer is that it's the kind of film that invites discussion long after the credits roll. You'll find yourself reflecting on the emotional impact of the film, wondering how the boys turn their traumatic experiences into something that feels like a form of triumph, even if the victory is small. The question of how much imagination can actually shape reality lingers, making you ask whether dreams are the ultimate escape or a necessary coping mechanism for survival. It's the type of movie that doesn't give you all the answers, leaving you with just enough room for your own interpretation. Some may wonder about the balance between hope and despair, while others might reflect on the complexities of childhood trauma. The emotional resonance of Radio Flyer also lies in its power to elicit empathy. The film doesn't present a tidy, neat narrative where everything is wrapped up in a bow at the end. Instead, it forces the audience to confront the imperfections of life and the bittersweet nature of growth. Watching Mike and Bobby face the unthinkable brings out a deep sense of compassion, and those who've gone through similar struggles will feel the emotional authenticity of the film on a different level. Even if you haven't experienced those specific hardships, the film taps into universal emotions: the love between siblings, the desire for escape, and the resilience needed to push through when life gets too heavy. And then there's the way the film invites repeat viewings. It's one of those films that only becomes more meaningful with each watch. The first time through, you're drawn in by the adventure and the fantasy. But as you revisit the film, you start to see the layers that were hidden beneath the surface. The more you reflect, the more you realize just how deeply the themes of trauma, healing, and imagination are woven into every moment. The emotional depth of the film doesn't fully sink in until you've had time to sit with it, making it a movie that resonates long after the first watch. Radio Flyer also opens up space for deep reflection on what it means to be a child in a world that isn't always kind, but also what it takes to survive, to fight for your dreams even when everything else seems to be against you. It taps into that universal human longing to overcome, to fly away from the things that hold us down, and to find a way to heal and grow. Whether you're crying for the boys suffering or smiling at their dreams, the emotional pull of the film is undeniable. It asks big questions about resilience, imagination, and the bonds that keep us going, and in doing so, it makes a lasting emotional impact on everyone who watches it. By the time the final scene rolls around, Radio Flyer has emotionally exhausted you, but in the best possible way. It's not a film you just watch and forget. It stays with you. It keeps you thinking. It makes you feel deeply, and those are the kinds of films that stick with you long after the credits have finished. When you look at Radio Flyer within the context of other family adventure films from the early 90s, you start to realize that it's doing something different. Most films in this genre, like The Sandlot or The Goonies, are filled with mischievous kids, fun, and adventure. They focus on friendships and the kind of youthful escapism that comes with summer days and wild imaginations. Radio Flyer, however, pulls the rug out from under that typical formula. It's not just about the adventure, it's about the emotional weight that comes with growing up in difficult circumstances, and it's not afraid to tackle darker, more uncomfortable themes. While The Sandlot leaves you with a sense of nostalgia and pure fun, Radio Flyer makes you feel like you've been through something much more profound. The adventure here isn't a fun romp, it's a coping mechanism. It's a survival tactic, and it's that stark contrast that makes the film stand apart. If we pivot to comparing Radio Flyer with other films that deal with childhood trauma or coming-of-age stories, like Stand By Me or even The Color Purple, it also stands out for its quiet yet impactful approach. Unlike Stand By Me, which is more about boys confronting mortality and loss through the lens of a road trip, Radio Flyer centers its narrative more on the internal, emotional battles that kids face when they're subjected to neglect and abuse. It's a much more introspective film, and while it doesn't have the same kind of heavy-handed moments that Stand By Me does, it still lands just as hard in terms of emotional resonance. Even within the director's own filmography, Radio Flyer is doing something more subtle and profound. Richard Donner, known for Superman and The Goonies, typically handles stories that are a bit more overt in their sense of adventure and heroism. In The Goonies, for instance, there's a clear external conflict and a larger-than-life villain that the kids can rally against. The movie is about finding treasure and defeating bad guys, but Radio Flyer dials down the external action and instead hones in on the inner lives of its characters. This film, while still carrying Donner's trademark ability to craft stories about children facing bigger-than-life situations, shifts focus toward the emotional and psychological challenges they face, rather than an external threat. The fact that Donner's direction makes these subtle emotional shifts feel as exciting and as impactful as the action-packed sequences in his other films shows just how much his style can evolve and adapt. Now, if we're talking about films that deal with children using fantasy as an escape from tough circumstances, Radio Flyer shares a common thread with The Wizard of Oz or even Peter Pan. But where those films often lean heavily into the fantastical to escape reality, Radio Flyer uses fantasy as a means of survival. The idea of the flying wagon doesn't exist to simply entertain the boys. It's a desperate attempt to fly away from an unbearable situation. In many ways, it feels like a more grounded version of Peter Pan, where there's no Neverland, just a harsh world that the characters must cope with. The flying element is not just about escaping to a magical world. It's about the boys escaping from the trauma they face in their own home. It's a subtle commentary on how children sometimes have to invent their own forms of escapism to deal with things that adults can't or won't address. As for Radio Flyer, in comparison to films that came before it, it's definitely offering something new in terms of how it balances the lightheartedness of childhood imagination with the deep emotional struggles of abuse and trauma. While many films before it might have avoided or simplified these complex issues, Radio Flyer doesn't shy away. It blends the two seamlessly, allowing the fantasy to exist right alongside the rawness of real-world pain. This is something that was quite groundbreaking for a family film in the early 90s. It's not just about escaping into a fantasy world. It's about finding the strength to continue when the real world doesn't offer much in the way of hope. This shift in tone makes it feel ahead of its time, as it appeals to both the younger audience who still sees the wonder in a flying wagon and to older viewers who understand the deeper emotional layers at play. So when you place Radio Flyer alongside its peers in the family genre, it's clear that it's breaking new ground. It's not just a film about children and adventure, but about resilience, trauma, and the power of imagination to heal. While films like The Goonies gave audiences pure escapism, and Stand By Me confronted the rawness of life through friendship, Radio Flyer subtly blends both elements and presents them in a way that invites reflection long after the movie's over. It might not be the most obvious choice in terms of genre, but it certainly makes a strong case for the complexity of childhood, and it handles its sensitive subjects with a quiet strength that is rarely seen in family films. Radio Flyer is one of those films that doesn't just tell you a story, it speaks in whispers, leaving you to discover deeper layers of meaning hidden beneath the surface. The imagery in the film is rich with symbolism, and each recurring motif serves as a subtle reminder of the emotional and thematic undercurrents at play. It's a movie that uses its visual language not only to enhance the storytelling, but to also invite the audience into a deeper, more introspective conversation about childhood, escape, and healing. One of the most obvious yet deeply symbolic elements is, of course, the red wagon itself. On the surface, it's just a simple toy, a child's plaything. But as the film progresses, that wagon transforms into something far more significant. It becomes a vessel for escape, a metaphor for hope, and even a symbol of the brothers' shared dreams of flight. The wagon is their escape route, not just from their physical surroundings, but from the emotional weight of their reality. It represents their desire to rise above the pain, to transcend the limitations of their world, and soar above the trauma that holds them down. It's also worth noting that a wagon is something grounded, something that's often used to carry things across flat terrain. But in the film, it takes on a far more fantastical function, a flying machine. It's the perfect metaphor for the way kids use imagination to transcend their difficult circumstances, to create their own worlds when the real one doesn't offer much hope. The motif of flight itself runs throughout the film, underscoring the idea of freedom, both physical and emotional. Every time the boys fantasize about the wagon soaring through the sky, it's more than just a child's flight of fancy. It's their mind's desperate attempt to escape, to distance themselves from the unbearable reality of their lives. The flight represents the wish to break free from their oppressive environment and to be in a place where they can heal, where they can experience the joy and freedom that has been denied to them. It's also a metaphor for the emotional growth they go through, as they begin to find strength and agency in their own imagination. The desire to fly isn't just about an escape to a magical world. It's about elevating their souls above the gravity of their pain. And then there's the recurring image of the mother, who, while always present, remains somewhat distant in the emotional center of the film. She's a figure of protection, but her inability to fully shield her children from the abuse they're facing becomes a significant part of the film's emotional tension. In many ways, she embodies the idea of a safe place that is, in truth, fragile and compromised. This delicate balance between protection and helplessness mirrors the boys' own journey. While they rely on their mother for safety, they're also learning that they have to protect themselves. The strained relationship with their mother adds a layer of complexity, as her inability to fully safeguard them forces the boys to rely on their own strength and imagination to endure. Speaking of protection, let's look at the stepfather, who is an embodiment of threat and suffocating control. His presence looms over every scene, and he's not just a character, but a symbol of fear, danger, and abuse. His shadow stretches over the boys, and in many ways, he's the metaphorical weight that keeps the brothers grounded, tethered to a world they desperately want to escape. The contrast between the father figure and the brothers' fantasies of flight speaks to the core struggle of the film, the battle between imagination and harsh reality. The more the boys fantasize about soaring above their circumstances, the more their stepfather's grip on their lives tightens. It's a powerful metaphor for the way trauma can control your life, but also how the power of the mind can offer a different, albeit temporary, form of freedom. In terms of visual storytelling, the use of color also contributes to the overall sense of emotional layering. The vibrant reds and blues of the wagon contrast sharply with the dreary, often muted colors of the boys' surroundings. The bright colors are like a visual representation of the dreams they hold onto, their emotional resistance to the gray world around them. It's a simple yet effective way of showing the tension between the inner world of imagination and the outer world of suffering. The use of light and shadow, the harsh, oppressive shadows that engulf the boys in the stepfather's presence, and the soft, ethereal glow that surrounds their flights of fantasy, also reinforces the theme of escape. The interplay of light and dark serves as a constant reminder of the emotional highs and lows that the boys experience throughout the film. In addition, the film plays with the concept of memory. The way the story is framed, with the narration of an adult reflecting back on the events, makes you question how much of what you see is real and how much is shaped by the narrator's emotional state. The past, for these boys, is not just a series of events. It's a landscape they've created to help them survive. The fantastical elements of the story, the flying wagon, the whimsical nature of their adventures, are not just childhood fantasies, but also the way they reconstructed their painful past to give themselves a sense of agency and power. It's a powerful metaphor for how we all reshape our memories in order to make sense of our trauma and move forward. At its core, Radio Flyer is about the power of the mind to transcend the limitations of a broken world. Every visual cue, every recurring motif, from the red wagon to the fleeting glimpses of flight, underscores this central idea. The film uses these symbolic elements not just as a way to tell the story, but as a way to communicate the emotional journey of the characters. They are reminders of how imagination, hope, and the simple desire for freedom can carry you through the toughest of times. By the end of the film, those symbols, the wagon, the flight, the struggle against fear, resonate deeply, leaving you with a sense of quiet triumph, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Radio Flyer isn't part of any franchise, nor is it a historical film based on a specific real-life event. But it does carry an undeniable weight when you look at its position within the broader context of films from the early 1990s. At this time, a lot of family films were focused on pure adventure, humor, and light-hearted escapism. But Radio Flyer came along and did something quite extraordinary. It offered a raw, emotional take on childhood trauma while still maintaining that sense of adventure and imaginative escape. In a sense, it stands out from other films of its time because it brings a kind of realism to the family genre that wasn't often seen. Most family films like The Goonies, Home Alone, or The Sandlot were about escapism, childhood rebellion, and the joyous freedom of growing up. They focused on the thrill of adventure and the bonds of friendship. Radio Flyer, on the other hand, doesn't shy away from showing the darker side of life. It was one of the first films to really address difficult topics like abuse and neglect in a way that was accessible, though it didn't sugarcoat the harsh realities the characters faced. In doing so, it expanded what family films could talk about and made it clear that kids could handle serious, emotional material as long as it was treated with the right kind of respect. If we look at Radio Flyer in terms of its place within the larger film landscape, especially in the context of films that came before it, it offers a more introspective and complex approach to childhood. While movies like Stand By Me had already begun to explore themes of growing up and dealing with loss, Radio Flyer took things a step further by exploring how children process trauma in ways that adults can't always see or understand. It wasn't just about the loss of innocence. It was about the emotional survival that comes with growing up in a broken home. And while it doesn't belong to a franchise, you can't ignore the fact that it's part of a wave of films in the late 80s and early 90s that started shifting away from traditional family fare. It's more in line with films like My Girl, The Elephant Man, or even The Pursuit of Happiness, where the emotional weight of a film doesn't necessarily come from grand adventures, but from the quiet moments of struggle, survival, and the inner strength required to face difficult situations. These films began to show audiences that children, though innocent and playful, also had to navigate complex emotional landscapes, and they did so with varying degrees of success. Moreover, Radio Flyer stands as a testament to the era's growing willingness to tackle more difficult, sometimes uncomfortable topics in mainstream films. It's no surprise that Richard Donner, a director known for his larger-than-life adventure films like The Goonies and Superman, took a more restrained approach with this film. It almost feels like a precursor to the more adult-oriented storytelling that would come to define much of the 90s. The historical context is also worth noting. The early 1990s were a time when the conversation around family dynamics and emotional well-being began to shift in the media. Films like Radio Flyer contributed to a broader cultural recognition of the complexities of childhood and family life. It was an era that saw more films exploring the nuances of domestic life, breaking away from the overly idealized depictions of perfect families that were often seen in earlier decades. In this way, Radio Flyer contributes to the evolving narrative of film during this period. It's a bridge between the fantastical adventures of 80s films and the more emotionally complex narratives that would come to define the 1990s. It holds a unique place as a family film that balances whimsy and fantasy with real-world trauma and healing, adding depth to a genre that was, up until that point, often lighter and more focused on fun and games. While not a franchise, and certainly not a historical film in the traditional sense, Radio Flyer is deeply connected to the cultural and cinematic moment of the early 90s. It helped expand the emotional vocabulary of family films and set the stage for other movies that would continue to explore the challenges of growing up, providing a more well-rounded and introspective view of childhood. The film didn't just fit into the mold of the family movie. It pushed the boundaries of what could be explored, showing that even within a child's world of fantasy, there are dark and difficult truths that need to be acknowledged and understood. When Radio Flyer was released in 1992, it wasn't exactly a big-budget blockbuster. With a production budget of around $25 million, the film didn't have the lavish resources or extensive special effects that many of the big family films of the time boasted. But what it did have, and what made it stand out, was a very specific kind of emotional depth and a unique narrative style that didn't rely on the typical big set pieces or star power. Instead, it was all about heart, imagination, and a focus on storytelling that many would argue elevates it beyond its financial constraints. The film's production quality is, in many ways, a testament to the strength of its vision. The set design, the visual effects, and the cinematography are all well executed, especially considering the modest budget. The film's emotional and thematic weight is carried by its actors, and the relatively low budget meant that much of the film's power came from the subtlety in the performances, the imaginative use of the red wagon, and the emotional journey the characters undergo. The quality of the production didn't come from flashy set pieces, but from the way the film drew its audience into its world, using simplicity and authenticity to create a powerful, immersive experience. The red wagon flying through the sky isn't some grand CGI spectacle. It's an emotional symbol, something that costs more in terms of time and creativity than special effects. But when it comes to box office success, Radio Flyer didn't exactly make waves. The film grossed only about $6 million worldwide, which was a significant shortfall from its $25 million budget. This outcome was a bit of a disappointment, and there are a few reasons for it. First, the marketing didn't quite know how to position the film. Was it a family movie? Yes, but it dealt with very heavy, emotional subject matter that made it more difficult to market to a younger audience. It wasn't the kind of film that was easy to slap a fun, adventurous tag on, and as a result, it didn't get the kind of wide-reaching promotion that other family films at the time enjoyed. Then there's the nature of the film itself. While Radio Flyer was undeniably heartfelt and unique, its subject matter, the emotional and physical abuse the boys experience, was heavy and dark, something that could be difficult for younger viewers to fully grasp or relate to. Families going to the movies to escape would likely have been looking for something lighter, something less emotionally taxing, and Radio Flyer didn't offer that kind of easy, breezy entertainment. This mismatch between the audience's expectations and the film's emotional tone may have contributed to its lukewarm box office reception. However, its reception wasn't entirely negative. Over the years, Radio Flyer has garnered a cult following, particularly among those who appreciated its emotional complexity and more serious take on childhood. As with many films that don't immediately find an audience, Radio Flyer has found its place in the hearts of viewers who return to it time and again, reflecting on the poignant themes and powerful performances. It's one of those films that didn't perform well in its initial release, but quietly carved out its space as a thoughtful and deeply moving piece of cinema that resonated with audiences on a more personal level. So, was it a financial success? Not by the traditional box office metrics, but its impact over time is undeniable, and its influence is still felt in the way that family films are willing to explore deeper emotional terrains. It wasn't the most lucrative film of its year, but in the long run, it contributed something much more valuable: a shift in how we think about childhood, trauma, and resilience in movies. Sometimes the true success of a film doesn't show up in its opening weekend numbers, but in the lasting impression it leaves on its audience. Radio Flyer may not have been a box office juggernaut, but it's a film that's endured, quietly earning its place as a deeply memorable, emotionally powerful film. When it comes to watching Radio Flyer, the options have evolved quite a bit since its original release in 1992. While the film didn't make waves at the box office back then, it has found a place in the hearts of audiences over the years, and the good news is that it's still accessible for those looking to dive into this emotional, nostalgic journey. In terms of streaming, Radio Flyer is available on a variety of platforms, but its availability might shift depending on the region or the subscription services you have. As of now, it often appears on platforms like Amazon Prime Video or sometimes through services like Apple TV or Google Play for digital rentals. If you're looking to rent it, these platforms offer a convenient option for a few bucks, giving you the chance to watch it at your own pace, maybe even on a cozy evening at home. For those who still have a soft spot for physical media, Radio Flyer is available on DVD. While it may not be as widely stocked as it was during its initial release, you can still find copies online through places like eBay or secondhand retailers, often at an affordable price. There's something special about owning a physical copy of a film, especially one with such emotional weight. Imagine popping in the DVD, sitting back, and letting that nostalgic feeling wash over you as you revisit this poignant story. But when it comes to the best way to experience Radio Flyer for the fullest impact, there's something to be said about watching it in a more intimate setting. This isn't the kind of film that requires a massive screen or elaborate setup to hit hard. In fact, sometimes the most immersive way to watch it is in a quieter environment where you can fully absorb the depth of the emotions and the performances. Whether it's streaming on your TV, watching on a laptop with headphones for an up-close experience, or even watching it on a rainy afternoon while curled up in a blanket, the key is to give the film the space to resonate with you. This isn't the sort of movie you rush through. It's about taking the time to let it breathe, to reflect on the subtle details, and to really connect with the characters' emotional journeys. For many, the first time watching Radio Flyer may be a bit of a revelation. It's not just about the adventurous red wagon. It's about the deeper, more complex themes of childhood resilience and trauma. So, pick a spot where you can be fully present, no distractions, no interruptions. The full emotional punch of this film can only be appreciated when you let yourself sink into its story, much like the characters do with their dreams of escape and freedom. And trust me, once it's on, you'll be glad you gave it that undivided attention. For those who are eager to dive deeper or share the experience with others, consider gathering a small group to watch it together. Not because it's a movie meant for a large crowd, but because Radio Flyer has a way of sparking conversation and reflection afterward. Sharing this story with others can add layers of depth, as different viewers bring their own perspectives to the film's themes. So whether you're streaming it, renting it digitally, or watching a good old-fashioned DVD, the key to fully experiencing Radio Flyer is in how you approach it, with patience, with an open heart, and with the understanding that this film has more to offer than meets the eye at first glance. It may not be the most high-profile movie, but its emotional depth ensures it's one that lingers long after the credits roll.